Hello and welcome to this Lightroom tutorial. In this video I want to show you how to create a dreamy winter edit using Lightroom Classic. So if you want, then choose an image of your liking and follow along. But be aware that this is a creative edit, so for some of you those changes might be a little bit extreme, and for others it might be just right. It's very subjective, there's no right or wrong. It's just my take on how I would create a creative, dreamy winter look to an image like this. And I chose an image like this as this was shot right before sunset, so I have warm highlights on the castle and here on the top of the trees. And during the editing process, I want to further enhance this warmness. And in general, I want to bring more warmth to the image and more magenta tones as well. So I already did some preparation. I created a snapshot of the base image so that we can go back to the original version. I already did some cropping and removed some tree branches that were creeping in from the side into the image that were very distracting. And I also applied the automatic lens corrections. And yeah, now I'm good to go. So let's go to the basic channel. And I want to increase the temperature, as I said. So I want to make everything a little bit warmer. And I have, yeah, quite a big color cast, a green color cast here in the shadows. So I want to increase the tint tiny bit to get rid of the color cast. And yeah, I don't want to change the overall exposure as I already have some minor shadow clipping and there's a big spike in the highlights and the whites. So making changes in either direction of the exposure slider will just introduce more clipping. I also don't want to change the contrast globally. I'd rather do that using masks. Now I want to reduce the highlights quite a bit actually and increase the shadows to reduce the contrast and reveal more details in the shadows. And there is some space left here on the right hand side of the histogram, so I actually want to push the histogram and increase the contrast a little bit more. Now for the dreamy and soft look of the image, it's very important to increase the blacks. So I want to do that and bring up the blacks quite a bit actually. Yeah, something like that looks fine. If I go to plus 100, you can see that this makes the image very soft. And this is the effect that I want to go for, but not in an extreme way. So yeah, bringing up the blacks to around 25, 26 looks good to me. Now there's a lot of details in the trees here, a lot of small details, and I want to make them a little bit sharper using the texture slider. So I bring up the texture and yeah, I don't want to make any changes to the clarity and the dehaze globally. I also want to use those sliders with masks. And I also don't want to change the vibrance or saturation. I also want to have more control over those sliders. So also using them in different contexts like the calibration or the color mixer or with some masks. So these are the basic adjustments. So we can have a look at the before and after. And we're already going to a more dreamy and soft look and also to a more warmer look of the image. All right, now let's go to the masking panel. And if you want to hear some tips and tricks about how to use mask in Lightroom, there's a link in the description to another video below. So I typically first start working on the sky. So let's make a sky selection mask and always check your selection. So you can see that there are some overlaps with the foreground and we can use the trick to intersect this mask with a new sky selection mask. And now you can see we have a way better selection. I think it's best practice not to work on the sky as a whole, but to work on parts of the sky. So let's let's subtract a linear gradient. And so now we have a sky selection mask for the lower parts of the sky. And I want to duplicate this mask before making any changes and just turn the linear gradient around. Now we have a second mask targeting the upper part of the sky. All right, now let's go to the lower part of the sky selection. And in this case, I want to make the clouds stand out more and I want to bring more warmth and temperature to it. But I don't want to start with the temperature slider, as making changes to the dehaze slider also will affect color. So bringing this up, you can see that there's a lot of oranges introduced into this selection, as well as some magentas on the right side, on the left side. And that's why I want to first start to make changes to the dehaze slider and then later on work on the temperature. So let's bring up the dehaze quite a bit. Something like that looks nice, I think. Also, let's bring out the clarity for some mid-tone contrast. And yeah, making those changes to these two sliders create some harsh or sharper edges in the clouds, and I want to avoid that. And to avoid that, or to bring more softness to it, I want to reduce the texture slider. And by doing that, we brought out more of the structure in the clouds by maintaining a softness for the clouds. All right, now let's go to the other sliders here. So yeah, as I said, I want to increase the temperature. So let's bring up the temperature a little bit and also increase the tint for some more magenta colors in the sky, or in the clouds, I should say. And yeah, also bring up the blacks, yeah, quite a bit. Something like plus 50 maybe. And yeah, finally, I want to reduce the highlights a tiny bit and also reduce the shadows. Nice. All right, now let's go to our the second sky selection mask. And yeah, for that, I think I want to get rid of some of the blues, but at the same time, I don't want too much color in the upper part of the sky. So let's bring the temperature up first to get rid of some of the blues. And now reduce the saturation to get rid a little bit more of the color. I don't want to have too much color in the upper part, but more on the center of the image. So this is a nice way to go. And yeah, let's actually bring up the whites for some more contrast. And I want to bring down the exposure for a slight exposure sandwich, meaning that the upper part of the image are slightly darker and the lower part of the image is slightly darker, so there's more attention to the center of the image where I want the attention to be. All right, now we can have a look at the before and after of applying those changes to the sky. So this is before and this is after. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with those adjustments. Now let's work on the foreground. So first I want to work on the closest foreground by just using a simple linear gradient, something like that. And as I said, I want an exposure sandwich, so I want to reduce the attention to the nearest foreground by bringing down the shadows first and also bringing down the whites quite a bit to something like that. I don't want to reduce the exposure, and I also don't want to reduce the blacks, as there is already some minor shadow clipping. And yeah, bringing either slider down will just lead to very dark parts in the foreground, and I don't want that. However, I want this foreground to be a little bit more washed out. So let's actually bring up the blacks a tiny bit to something like so. Yeah, this looks nice. I also still see a green color cast, so let's correct that by increasing the tint a little bit. And additionally, this part of the image lies in the shadows, so I want to bring a cooler tone to it by slightly reducing the temperature. Yeah, maybe not that much, just a tiny adjustment. All right, now I want to work on the, let's call it the center foreground. So again, I want to bring up a linear gradient, and I'm going to subtract a linear gradient to exclude the parts that we just worked on. And in this part, there's a pretty big green color cast, so I want to increase the tint to get rid of this color cast. And I also want the snow to be more white in this part and to pop more, so let's increase the whites and also increase the highlights quite a bit actually to bring more punch to this part of the snow. I also want to increase the sharpness in the details by bringing up the texture slider to around, yeah, maybe 10, 11. And I also want slightly more contrast by increasing the clarity slider just a little bit. And for a first glowy look, I want to decrease the dehaze, so negative dehaze, something like that. All right, let's see what what this mask did. So this is before and this is after. And as you can see, the snow is popping more, and we got rid of this or parts of the green color cast. And this looks pretty nice. All right, now I want to work on the castle, and selecting the castle will work best with a select objects mask. So let's use this mask, drag a big rectangle around the mask, the castle, and yeah, Lightroom is doing an okay job. However, we have some pretty harsh edges around the selection, so I want to soften that out a little bit by using a brush with reduced flow and density, and I just brush along this edge here a few times to soften the transition a little bit more. All right, something like that. So the castle itself is pretty bright, and I want to reduce the brightness by bringing down the highlights quite a bit actually. I also want to bring down the shadows a tiny bit, and also the blacks for a little bit more contrast. Yeah, this looks pretty nice. However, the castle should be the center of attention. So let's bring up the saturation a tiny bit. Something like that. And yeah, let's also again go down to texture clarity and dehaze. So I want to increase the sharpness by increasing the texture slider. I also want some mid-tone contrast, so increasing the clarity slider. And to help furthermore with the contrast, I want to increase slightly the dehaze slider. And yeah, looking at the before and after. So before, the castle was pretty washed out actually and lacking contrast, and now we have more contrast, a little bit more saturation, and by that also more warmth. So although we reduced the highlights of the castle, it's still the center of attention, and maybe we even brought it out a little bit more by bringing more contrast to it. All right, now to the dreamy glow part. For that, we'll create an Orton glow effect, and we do that by using a big radial gradient with a little angle, and we actually need to place the center of the mask outside of the frame. And it's very important that this mask is overlapping with the foreground. Maybe it's a little bit too big, so make it a little bit tighter. Yeah, I think this looks nice. And maybe a slight shift still. Sorry. And also want to bring down the center a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Okay, good. Now for this Orton glow effect, we need to increase the blacks. We need to decrease clarity and decrease the dehaze. And we also want this area to be a little bit brighter and warmer. So mimicking the light that is coming from the sun. It's not mimicking actually. The light is coming from the sun. We just want to further enhance that. So let's first bring up the blacks quite a bit actually. So if I bring it up to +100, you can see this. It's again looking very soft and a little bit washed out, but also a little bit more like glowing. All right, so let's bring this up to around 30. This looks good. And as I said, I want to bring up the whites. So increasing the brightness of this mask. And as I said, I want to decrease dehaze and decrease the clarity. And in this case, to make it even softer, I actually want to bring down the texture a tiny bit. All right, now let's go back up. I also want to increase the temperature. As I said, I want to make it a little bit warmer, this glowing effect. I want to increase the tint as well, so bringing more magenta to it. And in general, I want to increase the saturation as well to make those colors more saturated. All right, now let's have a look at the before and after of applying this mask. So this is before and this is after. And this looks very nice. All right. However, I feel that a little bit more punch is needed, a little bit more punch and softness for the snow. So let's make another mask, and I want to use a color range mask and just pick a snow color here from the roof, and I want to increase the selection, so including more adjacent colors by bringing up the refinement slider. And yeah, I want to exclude the clouds, so I already worked on the sky, so let's subtract a sky selection mask, and now we are only targeting the brightest and widest parts of the image. And yeah, to bring those out even more, I want again to increase the blacks quite a bit, increase the temperature as well, and yeah, again decrease clarity and dehaze just a tiny bit in this case. Let's bring that down. All right, let's have a look at the before and after. So this is before and this is after, so it just gives more punch and more warmness or temperature to the highlights. All right, finally I want a vignetting effect, so I want to apply a big radial or inverted radial gradient like so. Yeah, change the angle a little bit and bring the castle to the center of this mask. And now I want to invert the mask, and now I'm only targeting everything around this inner circle. So for the vignetting effect, I want to bring down the exposure quite a bit, and I also want to make everything else cooler. So let's bring down the temperature. And as a little creative touch, I want to actually increase the tint slightly and bring down the saturation. So I also feel like this looks very nice. The purpose of this vignetting effect is to draw the attention towards the center of the mask, and it really helps if I reduce the saturation of everything around it. So this again draws more attention towards the center of the image, in this case, which is the castle. All right, now we are done with masking. So let's have a look at the before of applying the masks and after. Before and after. And I feel like this looks very nice already. However, I want to make some changes to the colors of the image. So let's go to the calibration panel, and I want to increase the red primary hue. What this does is bringing more yellows to the highlights and more blues to the shadows. So as you can see, if I go to plus 100%, I want just a very minor adjustment, something like that. Increase the saturation as well. And I also want to increase the saturation of the blue primary channel. Nice. All right, now let's go to the split toning, so the color grading. And for that, I want to have more blues, so colder tones in the shadows. So let's choose a nice blue color and increase the saturation a tiny bit. As for the midtones, I feel like they are a little bit too bright. So let's actually decrease the luminance a little bit. And yeah, maybe go for a red color. Very minor adjustment as well. And for the highlights, I want to bring even more orange and warmth to the highlights. So I want to select a nice orange hue, something like that, and slightly increase the saturation. Okay, now I feel like there are still too much blues in this image. So as a final step, I want to decrease the saturation of the blues. Minus 29, negative 29 looks pretty nice. And we are done. So let's have a look at the before and the after. And as you can see, it's a very big change. As I said, I brought much more magenta and warmth to the image. I softened it. It's more dreamy. And yeah, I feel like this is a very nice edit. I personally like it. If you like it, if you dislike it, then let me know in the comments. So give me any feedback if you want to. I'd be happy to get in touch with you. And yeah, if you like this video, then give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of these kinds of contents, you can watch my other videos or subscribe to the channel, both of which really help with the algorithm. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.